All right, so thank you again, everybody, for logging in early, making sure your phones were on mute, and for joining me today as we're going to talk about web forms. So, the web form content type in Drupal, it's a page content type that you can use to gather information from your users for a different variety of use cases. The most common ones that we see are contact forms, web surveys, fairly simple applications, and then RSVPs for events. Something to keep in mind with the web form content type is it is restricted to users with site administrator access or content supervisor access to the back end of a GW Drupal website. So if you have somebody who's just a contributor, they will not be able to create a web form page, access the results, or really do anything to manage a web form page. It has to be somebody who is a site administrator or a content supervisor in your GW Drupal website. So a question that we get asked very often is, should I create a web form page in my Drupal site, or should I just use a Google form for this form that I need to create? And really the answer is it's at your discretion. We don't really think that Google forms are bad. It's just that both of them excel at doing different things. So you just have to take that information in hand when you're trying to make this decision. So what we found with web forms versus Google forms is that the GW Drupal web form page, it's highly customizable both for the email and the confirmation page. You're basically able to put in a lot of dynamic information into the emails that go out if you would like to. So the information that's input into the form, it's very easy to add that into the email as dynamic information. And then with the confirmation pages, you're only limited by whatever you can do with your WYSIWYG text editor. So that confirmation page can be very custom to whatever you need it to be. And then for the results, this is where some people think there's a bit of a con or a negative to it. The results are stored in your GW Drupal website, which again is restricted to users with site admin or content supervisor permission. So if you have somebody who needs to have access to the results and they're not a Drupal, like a back-end Drupal user on your website, that could be a limitation as far as whether or not you choose to use a GW Drupal web form or not. Now, on the other side with the Google Forms, they're pretty basic. They're designed to take in that information and then just be really, really shareable. So the emails that come through with your the Google Form results, they're pretty basic. You're not able to customize them. And then that confirmation page is also basic as well. And I'm pretty confident that most of us on the line have used the Google Form before, so you know that when you're done, all it says is thank you, and then there's like a link back to the form. And there's really nothing more that you can do with it. However, with the results, they're very shareable for anybody. Like, it doesn't have to be somebody with, like in Drupal, having site admin or content supervisor permissions. With the Google form, you can share it to anybody so long as you basically have their either GW email address or gmail.com email address. It's very easy to share those results, and that can sometimes be the deal breaker for people when it comes to creating a web form, which system they want to use. So that's really what we find it comes down to for people. So keep these three things in mind when you're trying to figure out for whatever your use case might be, if you should be using the GW Drupal web form page or the Google form. These are really the things that we find people make or break their decision on. Oh, and I neglected to say at the beginning, on the line I do have with me my colleague Jill. If you have any questions as we're going along, feel free to use the chat in WebEx to either, you can chat to me privately, you can chat to Jill privately, or if you don't really care if your question is private or not, you can send the chat to everybody, and then Jill or I will answer it as quickly as we can. I'll try and answer it in the context of what we're talking about in that moment if it's applicable and if I can. Otherwise, either one of us, as I said, we will try and follow up with you either in the process of this session or afterwards after the session has ended. All right, so the web form page, it is composed really of two independent elements. The first one, the first two together is your title, which is a required field, and then your body copy, which is actually recommended, but it's optional. And then those two elements display on the page completely independent of the form fields themselves. And the reason why that is it allows you to have the page public at all times, even if the form fields themselves are not. So you can have, the page up with some contextual body information in that body field, and then you can have the form field showing while the form is active. But then if it's like a seasonal form or something that was just needed to be up temporarily, you can hide those form fields and then update the information that's in that body field to give people context about why the form is no longer available and if it will become available at some point in the future. So with the title and body fields, your title will always display. It should provide context for your users, and it shouldn't be anything like generic. So for instance, in the example that I provided, application over registration over even the more generic term form. We have seen a lot of web form pages where the title is just form, and they have multiple form pages. And if any of you on the line who have managed a GW Drupal website know, if you have multiple pages that all have the same title, the URL for your page starts to show -0, -1, -2, and that's because that same page title is being used over and over again. So the more context that you can provide in your title for the web form page, the better, because it's also good for your end user. They'll know it's an application for a specific program if that's what you put in the title. And then again, for the body section, provide details about what the form's purpose is, if it's going to be available at all times, if there's a time limit on it, and what will happen when the form, for the form user, what's going to happen when they actually submit the form. Provide that information for them there. With your form field, users complete these fields directly on the web page, and then after the last form field, there will be a cyan submit button. You can have form fields that are hidden individually, and then as I mentioned before earlier, you can actually hide all of the form fields entirely if the form doesn't need to be public at that time. But each form field you create individually, you set up its configurations, and again, you can hide them individually if necessary. For instance, if a form field is no longer valid for whatever reason, you can hide that form field so that people coming to your form page no longer see it and are able to fill that form field out. So I mentioned earlier, with your web form, you can set up email rules so that when somebody clicks that submit button, they receive an email. You all would have received an email when you registered for this session. You completed the web form page on our page, on our website to register for this session. And when you click that submit button, you got a confirmation page, a custom one that we set up, and then you also got an email that we have customized to let you know your registration was successful. Here's the information that you need to log into the session. We always recommend when you're setting up your web form emails that you set one up to go to the form owner, you set one up to go to the web form submitter, and then potentially, if it's applicable in your use case, you set one up to a designated person for follow-up. So, for instance, if I'm the person who set up the web form page for this session, but I'm not the person who's teaching the class, I'm going to make sure that I set up an email rule so that the person teaching the class will be notified as new attendees register for the session. And then I also set up an email again for each registrant who signed up for the session as well. So those are the three that we find are the best, most consistently, the ones you most consistently should include when you're setting up your web form rules. And it is possible, by the way, to have multiple people included in an email rule on like a single email rule. You don't have to set a different email up for each individual person, and I'll show you how that works later on in the session. So with your submissions, those get logged in the backend of your GW Drupal website, as I mentioned before, and you can see here in the screenshot they're accessible under the Results tab. Again, by default, they will be in the back end of your site, so somebody with site admin permission or content supervisor permission will then need to log in to be able to look at all the results, but they can also be exported in an Excel or a CSV file if you need to share those results with somebody who is not a back-end user of your GW Drupal website. So it is possible to share those results with a non-GW Drupal site admin or content supervisor. It just requires a little bit of manual legwork on the part of a back-end user of your GW Drupal website. And then for unpublishing your web form, so I mentioned a couple of times it's possible to hide the form field independently of the page title and body information, and that's under the status section of the form, which we'll take a look at when we get into the back end. But it's just a simple radio button here that says status of this form closed, and then closing a form prevents any further submissions by any user. So again, this is helpful for if this is a short-term field or short-term form that needs to be available to your users. Maybe it's something that only needs to be live for a few weeks or months, or if it's something that's seasonal, you only have it open for a given semester for a certain period of time. You can change the status of your web form to closed. The page title and body information will still display, and again, you can update that to give your users context as to why they can no longer get to those form fields. And then by changing the status to close, the form fields are no longer visible at all. People cannot continue to put submissions into the web form page. So it's better for the user experience because the alternative to doing this is just unpublishing that entire web form page. But as any of you know, if you unpublish a page and somebody has that link, they get a 404 error message saying the page cannot be found or the page doesn't exist. And that can lead to a lot more questions and legwork on your end versus if the form fields themselves had just been hidden. Then you might have somebody who's emailing you and calling you and saying, I need to get to this form, it's really important, I need to fill it out. But really the issue is that the form is no longer available for whatever administrative reason that you have. So in those cases, we recommend closing the form, setting its status to close, as opposed to unpublishing the form page as a whole. And that's actually all I have for the slides. We're going to go ahead and get logged into a web form page. And before I do that, I actually want to show you guys an example of a form that I set up, and it's got all of the various form fields on the page. So let me share my browser with you. Okay, are you all able to see my browser page here with the web form demo page up? Great, thank you. All right, so this demo page, I literally have every single form field possible on this web form page. I do not recommend doing that. Something that is not good for your user experience is having a very long form. If you do have to have a long form, it's possible to paginate them to basically split your web form into multiple pages. That is a slightly better user experience for your users, but even then you do want to be cognizant of not overdoing that as well. So maybe 2 or 3 breaks, but really no more than that because you might start losing your audience at that point. So I'm just going to scroll down and show you each one of these. And also keep in mind that the site that we're looking at right now, this demo page, and the site that we're going to be working in, this is in the editorial theme of GW Drupal, which is the theme that we use for all current GW Drupal website projects. I know some of you are still on our old theme. Everything that you're going to look at today and everything you're going to see today is possible to do in the older classic theme of GW Drupal as well. The styles are just going to be different, but the functionality is the same. So there's nothing that I'm going to do today and nothing that you're going to see today that you cannot do on your own website. So starting at the top, we have the page title and the body text. Again, I put some information in here for my users, which is you guys, to let you know what this form is about, what you can expect to see on it, and what would happen once you click the submit button. And then as you scroll down up here, I just have a simple text field. It's a single line field that your user can fill in. Obviously, one of the most common use cases for this is like first and last name. Beneath that is the email field, and even though visually it looks the same as your text field, this field has automatic validation for proper email format. So if I put my email address in here and I put .gw.edu instead of @gw.edu, when I go to submit this form, I'm going to get an error message saying that my email is invalid. It's not happening now. It's not one that it's not an error message that comes up in context as the user's filling out the form. It does show up after the form is actually submitted. The next one, and this is one that we get asked about a lot, is the file form field, and this allows the user to upload a document. So the backend for this form field has a lot of configuration options as to what file types you will accept, and it's pretty robust. I have not yet seen a form field type that it does not accept. So it's pretty robust. I think the defaults are image file types, but it has your standard document ones in there, and you can see when the user clicks the button, it opens up the standard upload process. The next form field is the date field, so this allows your user to indicate a date here. There's a lot of customizations you can do on the back end, and I haven't customized any of these fields. These are exactly what they look like out of the box, but there are customization options on the back end so that you can say, when they're selecting a date, only allow them to put in for, this many years forward or this many years back. There's an option to say whether or not this pop-up calendar shows, making the year a text field as opposed to a drop-down as we see it here. So each form field, again, has a lot of configurations that you can take a look at and play around with to get your form working the way that you need it to for your particular use case. There's also a time form field. It's pretty similar to the date one. Just put some drop-downs in there for the hour and the minute. And you can indicate if you want these to be single minutes or if you want them to be in multiples of 5, 15, whatever the case might be. It also supports 24-hour format as opposed to 12-hour format if that's what you need. And then if you're using the 12-hour, you'll get the AM and the PM as radio buttons over here. The number field, it allows you to basically do what it says. You can put a number in here and only numbers. It will not accept letters as characters. And if you just put the field on there and do nothing else, it's pretty infinite for whatever you can put in there for numbers. But you can do things like saying decimal points for which you will accept. If you want it to be in certain multiples or integers, you can have symbols in front or behind, so you can have a dollar sign at the front if you would like, or a percentage on the back. I know that it's possible, but I don't know how to do it, but I know that it's possible to use the number field to do some sorts of simple calculations. So it's another one that has a lot of configurations behind it to allow you to really make the most out of using the web form page, but this is what it looks like out of the box. It's just a simple, you can either type in your number or the user can use this little up and down arrows to the right here to step up as necessary to the next number. The text area field is most commonly used as a comment box. I have not seen it used for any other reason. You can have it where it is resizable, or it can just be a fixed box that they cannot resize. You can put character limits in it, and I think you can actually put character limits in the above text field as well. So it can be a pretty helpful form field to have if you're using this as like a contact form or an application form, something along those lines. You have, I put in a page break on my form, so once you do that, you'll get a button down here that says next page, but you can actually customize what this button says. This is what it says by default, but if you just want it to say next, you can have it just say next, and when you click on that, oh, there's my validation for my email, so we're going to take that out, and then we're going to click next. And when you do that, you get to the next set of form fields on the page. Your title and body copy stays in place, and the next set of form fields will show up. The next form field is actually this right here, which I know it looks like it's just plain text, but it's called a markup field. And what the markup field allows you to do is to literally drop in on the back end, at the very least, you as the form admin will see a full WYSIWYG text editor, so you can put some text or images or buttons, whatever you need to put in there, in between form fields. So this can be pretty helpful if you need to provide some context for the next set of fields that your user is going to see. And there's the option to put a description under individual form fields, but it's pretty small. Sometimes people miss it, so this is a great way to put something in that's a little more visually prominent, and you also get the use of accessible features such as subhead styles. So right here, I believe this is an H2 that I put on the page. So it helps it just stand out a little bit more on your web form page. So that's what your markup field will do. Beneath that, you have what's called the grid option. These are pretty standard for when you see people say, on a scale of 1 to 5, tell me how much you liked my service. So that's what the grid form field is styled to do. And then beneath that, then there's actually what this is called as a field set, obviously. And what this actually allows you to do is have a collapsible element set of fields within your form. So if I expand this, you'll see that there's actually more form fields inside of that because I actually nested them inside. Not a lot of people use this. There's not really a ton of use cases on web form pages, but one that I recently helped somebody with was they needed to have the ability to take information about people in a given setting, and there was no, multiple sets of repeating information about the individuals, and so they didn't want to weigh the page down by having 5 different chunks of form fields to represent that. So they created field sets, 5 individual field sets that were all collapsed, and then that information for each user could be added, and then that field set could be collapsed, and they could move on to the next one. So it was a great way to get a lot of form fields that were repetitive in nature in one spot without weighing the page down visually. And then down at the bottom, as you can see, we've got a button for the previous page as well as our submit button that upon completing the form field, I would click on that submit button, I would get my confirmation page, and then if there was an email set up, I would get that confirmation email. Now, something I didn't do on this form field because I wanted to be able to show you, or on this form because I wanted to be able to show you everything, was to make anything a required form field. When that is the case, you'll see a red asterisk next to the form field label. The user will not be able to submit the form without completing that field. And in the case of a form being paginated, so having multiple pages within it, if there's a required field on the first page, it cannot go to the second page without filling in that required form field. Now, I'm able to do that because I didn't set up any required form fields on my entire page, but if my text field was required here and I didn't fill it in, when I click this next page button, I would actually get an error message saying this field is required, and it would actually be highlighted in red if I'm remembering correctly. So that's what all of the form fields look like on the page by default. I know I've said it many times, but I'm going to say it again. There are configurations for each form field that you can use to kind of customize it to your specific use case needs. We're not, in the process of today's session, going to go over every single form field configuration. But if you do have questions about that, feel free to put them in the chat. And again, myself or Jill, and then also on the line joining us is Annette Thompson. If you have questions about some of the form fields and I'm not going over it in today's session, feel free to put them in the chat. We will try to answer them in the context of the session if possible, or one of them will reach out to you privately to answer your question, or I'll provide that information in a follow-up. And additionally, I do have, I'm sending additional resources after the session with today's recording. There's also a training that I did previously for advanced web form validations, and I will send that as well, and it will go over some of those advanced configurations that we will not be going over today. So are there any questions at this point before I actually get logged in and we create a form? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get logged in. So I'm just going to put /user at the end of my website address, and most of you on the line probably know this, but you do need to be on a GW Drupal network to log into the back of the GW Drupal website. If you are not on campus, that's going to require that you be on the GW VPN, which I am. So if you ever are trying to log into the back end of a GW Drupal website and you see a message that says access denied, your IP address has been blocked, your IP address has not been blocked. That unfortunately is the generic message that comes across for this particular error, but really the issue is just that you're not on a GW network. So make sure that you're either connected to G Wireless or some other GW network, or again, if you're off campus, make sure that you're on the GW VPN so that you can get to the login page. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. And then I'm going to hover over my workbench, create content, and then I'm going to select web form. So our required title here, I'm going to put this as Web Form 101 page. In my body field, again, this is an optional field. We do recommend filling it in. I'm going to put in some dummy text, some lorem ipsum. So I'm just going to grab that now. But again, when you're creating your form page, we recommend that you do fill that in with just some brief information about what it is that users can expect from your form, as far as follow-up, what the form is meant to be used for, really just any helpful context that you can give to your users. I'm going to use my paste from Word option since I copied that from another website. I want to make sure I strip out any extra styles and extra code. I don't need this bolded, so I'm going to undo that. And that is going to be the contextual information on my page. Site placement is required, so I'm going to select Drupal training. And then I'm going to go ahead and put this in my menu under the Drupal training section. And then I'm going to go ahead and publish my page and click Save. You can just click leave it set as draft. You don't have to publish it if you obviously are still working on it and you don't want people to see it. Since this is a demo site, I'm fine publishing it, but on your real live website, as you are preparing your own web form pages, feel free in that first step that I just completed to just leave the moderation state set to draft and just click the Save button. But that is required to be able to now go through the process of adding your form fields to the page. Because now we can see on the front end, I've got the standard new draft, moderate, and panelizer tabs, but I've also got my web form and results tab. And the web form tab is where you want to go, so that's where we're going. All right. So you do have to put each one of your form fields in one by one, and you can see that we're in the web form tab. We've got the button here for form components, which is where we are. We'll then move into setting up the email. We'll take a look at form settings, and then I'll briefly just take a peek at form validation, but again, we're not really going to get into the nitty-gritty on that. So the first field we're going to put in is just for the first name. So I'm actually going to label that first name. Whether or not you put a semicolon with your label, that's entirely up to you. It's a personal preference for people. I am going to say that this is a mandatory field, and I'm going to click Add. After you click that Add button for any web form field, you're going to get brought to a configuration page where you're going to see the label represented again, and you can change it here if you would like. And then the next field you see is field key. This gets automatically generated based off of whatever label you created in the previous step. You don't have to change it here unless you want to. The important thing to know about this is it creates sort of like a machine name or like a serial name for your Drupal website to reference whenever it's processing web form information, like processing the submission for your web form. It only accepts lowercase letters and a few special characters. It doesn't accept uppercase, and there's also it's not stated here, but there is a character limit, which I believe is 35 characters. If you have a machine field key that's longer than that, it can actually cause some issues with the processing of the web form page. So I say that for those times where maybe you have a really wordy question that you've put as the field label. Feel free to come down here and create a shorter version of the field key. Maybe just a couple of words. I've done that plenty of times where I've had a question that's like 15 words long, and then I've come down here and said, 2 or 3 words instead, because all the system needs to know is what is the unique field key for this web form field question. It doesn't have to be a complete regurgitation of what's in that label field. If you would like to have a default value displayed in your form field when that form field page or that form page loads for your end user, you would just fill in this field. I'm going to go ahead and put first name in here so that you can see what I mean. And then, or actually, let's make it George. Make it an actual name. If you would like a description under your form field, you would put that here. So I'm going to say, please enter your legal first name. Token values, these are what allow you to have dynamic emails and things along those lines. You can look to see what the token values are here, and you can use them in your form fields. We're not really going to get into that now. That's kind of advanced. It's something that I'll talk, or that you'll see in the advanced validations resource that I'm going to send to you. But I just wanted to reference it since it is there. The next one you'll see is encryption. What this checkbox does is, I mentioned earlier, when you create your email rules, and email can go out to whoever you've indicated those email rules to go to, the encrypt checkbox will make it so that whatever this particular form field is, that information will not get transmitted over email. So for instance, if you want to take GWIDs from your end users, make sure you check this box. You should never be emailing GWIDs. They're basically GW's alternative to a social security number, and your GWID is unique to you as somebody at the university, and it allows for access to certain information for your record at the university. So that's information that you should never be sending over email, as that's not a secure form of communication. So if you are accepting GWIDs from your end users, make sure that you check this encrypt this field checkbox. I'm not going to do that for first name because there's no reason to encrypt that. Moving down, here's another place where you can say whether or not this is a mandatory field, a required field for your end users to fill in. And then unique is saying that the whatever the person submits into this field, it cannot be used again by any other user. So for instance, my first name is Natasha. If I have this unique checkbox checked, if somebody else comes along and their first name is Natasha and they put that in, they're actually going to get an error message. So I typically only use this for like email addresses on registration forms because I want to make sure that somebody doesn't accidentally register multiple times. But this is how you would do that. You're basically restricting the value that somebody's putting in the form field and saying that that value can only be entered in once for this entire form. Max length, this is where you can put in the character limit if you would like to. And then for your display options, you can say for like width of text field and things along those lines. I don't believe this one actually works anymore. I'd have to test it. We have styles on the editorial theme website now to standardize what the web form page will look like. So I think this no longer works. But this is where you can put in a prefix for this form field if you would like. And again, you could also put in a postfix if you would like. And they have some examples there for you. And then another one that no longer works is this label display. Now all of the labels will display in line to the left. They used to have the option to say if they would be above or in line, but now by the styles that we have in the theme itself, they're always going to be in line to the left. If you no longer want this field to be something a user can actually fill in, you would say disable it. And if you wanted this to be something that only somebody who is a site admin or a content supervisor, basically a back-end user of your GW Drupal website can see, you would check this private checkbox. So those are the various configurations that you're going to see. And these are the ones that we're seeing here. They're pretty repeatable across all of the form fields that we're going to be adding to our form. There's going to be some variation. Sometimes you won't see one. Sometimes you'll see a new one. It's going to depend on the functionality of the form field that you're creating at that time. But in general, you're going to see these across most of them. So that's why I wanted to make sure to go over each one of these. Once you have your form field configured the way that you would like, you just click that Save Component button, and you will see that it is now available on your form. And the thing to know when you're adding fields to your form, they are live immediately. There's no in-between state of a form field being like a draft form field. It is immediately visible as soon as you click that Save Component button. So if I now go to View Published on the front end of my form, there's my first name field with that default value, the description, and a Submit button. So again, if you're working on your form field and you need to kind of get things in shape before you want people to use it, I highly recommend that when you create your page, you leave it in draft mode, get your form fields in order, then publish your page because the fields are going to show immediately. So let's move along. We're going to add last name, and I'm going to just do this one quickly because it's pretty repetitive of the previous one. I will say this one is also required, and we will add. I'm not going to change any of the values here, but I will put in a default value of Washington. All right, and then the next one we're going to put in is email. So to change that, I'm going to open up my drop-down for the type of form field, and I'm going to select email. And you can see all of the other options that we have here. I'm going to select email, and again, I'm going to say it's required and click Add. And you'll see the configuration options on the back end here. Just like with the text field, they're pretty, they're repetitive of what we saw previously. Here's a new one where it says user email as default. You don't really ever want to check this because it's looking to see if this is a logged in user, and then it's going to automatically populate that logged in user's email account. But obviously, the people who are filling in your form are very unlikely to have accounts in your GW Drupal website. You can encrypt that field just like with previously, and I don't see any other custom configurations for this field, so I'm just going to say Save Component. The next form field that I'm going to add is the file one. So we'll say Upload Documents. I'm going to have this be an optional form field, so I am not going to check the mandatory box, and I'm going to click Add. And you can see label, field key, description, all of that is there. Upload destination, public files versus private. Don't change this. Leave it set to public files. If you change it to private files, we didn't code anything behind that, so it could actually wreak a little bit of havoc on the back end for you. So leave it set to public files. Same thing for directory. Don't put anything in there. Here's your option for saying whether or not a form field is mandatory or not, so whether or not they're required to upload a document. And then you can also change the maximum allowed upload size here, and you can see that your range is 800 kilobytes up to 2 megabytes. So if you want the fields to be smaller, you can do that up to 2 megabytes for an individual. Wait, I think I'm reading that wrong. A max upload of 256 megabytes. The default is 2 megabytes. My apologies. So if you want it to be smaller, you can do that. If you want it to be huge, you can do that as well. Keep that in mind for processing speeds and things along those lines. But it does give you some leeway as far as the size of the documents that your users can upload. And then this is what I was saying is pretty robust as far as what types of files you can upload to your site. So you've got, by default, it's going to have the image one selected. You can just uncheck them and then move down to what you need, and that's most likely going to be the document section. If you want everything, you just click that select button. If you click it again, everything gets unselected, and then you can go in there and just pick specific ones. So maybe I only want to accept PDFs, or maybe I only want to accept Word docs. We also do accept PowerPoint templates. If there's something that you need to accept that you don't see listed here, this additional extension field is where you will say that. So if you wanted to accept Word document templates, you could put that template file extension here, which I believe is doctx, if I'm remembering correctly, or maybe it's just doct. But I would indicate that here to say I will also accept this particular file type if it's not already listed up here. And then, again, you would just say Save Component. Moving along, the next form field that we see people asking about the most are the Select Options form field. So I'm going to add that in there. What your Select Options does is it allows you to put multiple options that a user can pick from, and there are 4 formats that it will create for you. The first one being radio buttons, which is its default. The next one, most commonly used, are checkboxes. You can also have a drop-down, and then finally you can have a select box or pick list box. So I'm going to show you how to do each one of those, and we're going to start with the radio buttons, which is its default. And we're just going to say choose one. Select options, and we'll click add. So our standard configurations are there, and then we see there is a required configuration called options. Now what this is looking for is what do you want the multiple choice options to be, and there's a specific format that you have to put it in where it says save key and then pipe and then some readable option. And let me bump up the size of my screen because I don't know how well you guys can see that on the WebEx. So I want to make sure it's nice and big. But you see save key and then underscore for the empty space. And then you see the pipe on the keyboard. That's usually the key with the backslash. You'll hit shift and then you'll actually get the pipe. And then some readable option, which is basically the actual value you want people to see on the front end. So I'm going to go back down just a bit, not all the way. On our form field, let's say I want people to indicate what semester they want to do, or they want to indicate on the form at this point. So my options are going to be fall semester, summer or spring semester, summer semester. So I'm going to, for my save key, which is the machine key that the system is looking for to know, what to process that as, in under or lowercase letters, I'm going to put fall underscore semester. And then I'm going to put that pipe, and then immediately I'm going to put the human readable version that just says fall semester. And this is what my users are actually going to see on the front end. This is what the system is going to look at to process the form field, but this is what my end users are going to see. And it always has to be in this format. It needs to be in the save key. So spring semester, and then human readable. And then one more time. Now, keep in mind, with your save keys, it just needs to be in the format that the machine can digest it in. If you don't have multiple words, you don't have to use multiple words. Like, you don't have to force that. I could have just said fall, and then fall semester, and then spring, and then spring semester. It will still process the exact same way. You just need to be sure that you're doing it in the safe key format, which is all lowercase and no spaces in between the words. If you have spaces in between the words, you need to use the underscore. And then on the other side of the pipe, that's where you put that human readable option. So now that I've got my 3 options in there, I'm going to go ahead and scroll all the way down, and I'm just going to click Save, because the default format of the Select Options form field is radio buttons. So the next one we're going to do are the checkboxes, and I'm running out of names for my form field, so I'm just going to say checkboxes. We'll leave it set for Select Options. And then for this one, I'm just going to put CB1, and this is checkbox item 1, and then I'll say CB2, checkbox, spelling that wrong, WebEx, item 2, and then I'll do CB3. Okay, I can type. And then if those are the only options that I want, I'm going to go ahead and move down, and I'm going to click this multiple checkbox that we see here. And this is what the system is looking for to know if the user is allowed to select more than one option. So I'm going to go ahead and say Save Component. And then we are going to move on and put another one in there. This one is going to be our drop-down option, leaving that set to Select 1 or Select Options, and we'll add that. And then if you scroll down, we're just going to say D1, drop down item 1, D2, drop down item 2, and then D3, drop down item 3. Now with your drop down, you only want your user to pick one item, so we're not going to give them the option to select multiple items. We are going to scroll all the way down to where it says Display, and we're going to say List Box. And that's all we have to do to create the drop-down. But before I do that, I do want to show you that there are some pre-built options available to you, and you can use these, I think, for all 4 of the select option formats. But your options are days of the week, countries, or at least countries at the time that this list was compiled. As we know, this has changed over the years. And then U.S. states. So it will pre-populate a list with both the safe key and human readable option of either the days of the week, countries, and U.S. states if you choose one of these. I'm going to leave that as is and go ahead and move down. I've already selected list box for my drop-down field, and I'm just going to say Save Component. And then finally, we're going to put our select list box. So I'll click Add, and I'll just do SL1, list item 1, SL2, list item 2, and SL3, list item 3. Now, with your select pick list, these are the ones where you do typically want to give the user the option to pick more than one item. So we are going to say that we want them to have the option to pick multiple items. And then just as we did before, we're going to pick this option for list box because we want them to see all of the options listed out, but we don't want them to be radio buttons or checkboxes. We want it to be a list. So then we're going to go ahead and say Save Component. And those are the only form fields that I was actually planning to add today because these are the most common ones that we see individuals use. Actually, I'll add a text area box as well, and we'll put additional comments in here. It's a pretty simple field to add, so we'll say additional comments, and we'll open up our form field options, and we'll pick text area. And then we'll say Add. And then all of our standard configuration fields are here. I'm going to leave them set at their default, but you can see there are some options here. The width and the height one, I don't believe those function anymore now that we have some styles in there that we've forced, but this is where you can say if you want that box to be resizable or not. You can also hide the label if you would like. but I'm just going to go ahead and say save component. And now, if we, I'm going to go back to my regular browser size. I hope this is still visible for everybody, but if we go ahead and say view publish now, and we scroll down, we can see I've got my first name and last name field with the pre-filled in values of Georgia and Washington, my required email field, an upload button there, and then I've got my radio buttons where I have to pick one semester, followed by my checkboxes where I can select all three if I would like, followed by my drop-down, and then followed by my list item. And you can see that the item that you're actively hovered over will be highlighted in the GW light blue cyan color. If you actually select one, it stays highlighted, but it's a slightly different shade. So if somebody still has their cursor in there, they can see that there's a different color there, and the entire box also gets highlighted when you move out. It's still selected, but now it's gray. And here is my comment box. Now, if I just click submit right now, I'm going to get a couple of error messages because email field is required. You'll notice I didn't get an error message for the first name and last name, and that's because there are defaults in here. So this is an illustration for why you need to be careful if you're going to put default values in a form field and make that a required form field. If your user comes along and their eye just skips over it, or they forget to put in their actual information and that default information goes in there, that's not helpful to you, and they're not going to get an error message because technically there is something in that form field. So keep that in mind if you do provide default values and you're making it a required field. Your user might not put in their actual custom unique information that you're actually seeking, and you might not get the information that you need. But you can see here my email field is highlighted in a very light shade of kind of pink, actually, to indicate I need to fill in this field as appropriate. I'm actually not going to do that right now because I want to move on to showing you guys how to set up email rules. But does anybody have any questions on what I've showed you so far, just as in regards to setting up your form? All right, well, let's move along. So to set up the email rules, I'm going to go back into Webform, and we're going to click on the button for emails. So again, if you don't come here, if you don't set up these email rules, by default, all of your results are going to get logged into the back end of your Drupal website. You're not going to be notified that somebody submitted to your form. Nobody's going to be notified. Your end user's not going to get any kind of email confirmation. So it's kind of just one of those things where it's like you feel like you're shouting into the void of the internet. So you definitely want to come here and set up some email rules so that your users know they get a confirmation email for one, and then for whoever's the designated person for follow-up, that person should also be getting an email to let them know somebody submitted the form. And then if necessary, you as the form creator, if you would like to know as well, you can set up a rule to be notified as well. So I'm going to set this up to go to Online Strategy email inbox. So for that, I'm just going to put in the Online Strategy email address and click Add. The next page that loads is basically asking me, what do you want your email to say when it comes through? You have another option here, or another opportunity here to change this email address if you would like. If you select component, which we'll do shortly, this will go to whatever value the person who's completing the form put in that email address field. So that's how they get that confirmation message. But for now, I'm just going to have it go to my team's inbox. So for the subject line, the from address, and the email from name, you have three options, the first one being default, and it's going to basically pull from information in your website. So the default email subject, I'll bump this up a little bit to make it easier to see. It's always going to say form submission from and then your web form page name. So it's looking to see whatever you titled your web form. That might be enough for you, and you can leave it set to that. If you want something more custom, click on that custom radio button, and then you can put something custom in here. You can say someone contacted you via, and then you can put something in here. This is one of those places I mentioned earlier, token values. This is one of those places where you can drop in a token value. So I can actually use token values in this field to dynamically pull the name of the person, their department, really any information that they submitted to the form, as well as other information throughout my website where there might be a token value in place. So this is one of those places where you can make this information dynamic. I'm going to leave it set to the default for now. But the final option here is the component option. It doesn't really apply too well for the email subject line. It is much better for the email address and the email from name. So what I typically do for the email from address is I select a component option, and then I go to whatever field I had set up for the email address. However, it does allow you to pick from the select options list, just because on that back end where we were putting in the safe key, the machine key that Drupal is looking at to process that form field, you can actually put an email address there instead. And based off of which option the person selects, when you come here and pick a from email address, you can say, based off of whatever option they picked in your checkboxes or your radio buttons or whatever the case might be, email this person. I know that it's a cool thing to do. I'm going to caution against it just because I think there's some security risks around it, but I just want to explain why you even see that there as an option at all. So again, select option is there because that safe key, instead of it being like CB1 as I was doing, I could have put online strategy at gw.edu. And when somebody selected the option assigned to that particular checkbox or radio button, whatever the case might be, here, when my email got triggered upon submission, the online strategy inbox would have been notified. But I'm just going to, for the email from address, choose component as what I want to be used in that particular field, and then I'm going to say whatever the person put in their email address, that's what I want the from email address to be. And I'm going to do the same thing down here for the from email name. Because like if I were to send an email, it's going to say Natasha Mojica. Well, when you submit, when somebody submits to your web form, what name is the system is supposed to say it's from. The default is for it to say it's from my website name, which is kind of not useful. You can put something custom in if you would like, but that also potentially might not be useful. So what I found to be most useful is to select a component option. And in this case, it will look for any text field that you have on the page, as well as, again, the select options fields that you might have. But obviously, I just want it to be the person's name. So in this case, it's going to say that it was from Natasha. Now, moving down to the actual email template. This is where you can customize that email, and you can see some of the tokens in place already. So this is what the default template looks like. You can delete anything here that you don't need. I always recommend deleting this line. The results of the submission may be viewed at, and then this token for the submission URL. I recommend it because if you are setting up an email rule to go to somebody who does not have backend Drupal access to your website, they're going to see a link there that's associated with the individual's submission, but they won't be able to actually access it. They're going to click on it, and they're going to get an error message that says, you do not have access. And then they're going to say, well, why is there a link here? It doesn't work. You're going to get an email saying, hey, you sent me an email. There's some information in the submission, but I can't access it because the link is broken. The link isn't broken. It's just that it's like a shortcut link to the submission information in the backend of the Drupal website. But if they don't have access to the backend of your Drupal website, that link isn't going to work for them. So I always delete that just to remove that that little bit of frustration and headache for everybody. And then this is just what's left for the standard email template, and it's perfectly fine to put in there. I found that the username field isn't that useful, so I will typically delete that one as well. But the submitted on date and then the actual values that the person put in there, this is the information that we want. So I leave that there, and then I go down and I just say save my email settings. And now I've got my email rule for to go to my online strategy inbox for whenever somebody submits to this form field or to this web form. Now I have a document with all of your email addresses, and I'm going to show you. I'm going to copy that. This is how you would set it up if you want multiple people to be notified. You would put everybody's email address in there, separated by a comma, but no space. So I've got everybody who registered for this session, I've got all of your email addresses as well as myself and my colleagues' email addresses are all in here. And then each email address is separated by a comma and then immediately followed by the next email address. This is how you set it up if you want multiple people to be notified that a submission has been logged for a particular form field. I'm not going to worry about customizing anything. I'm just going to show you what happens when I click Save. So now you can see all of these email addresses here. All of these people, that's you guys, are now going to be notified when somebody submits to this form field. And you know what I'm actually going to do? I'm going to swap this because I don't want you guys to see the ugly one. I want you to see the nice one where we customized it. So I'm just going to paste that information in there, and I'm going to change this one to be the online strategy one. And I'll show you what the default email looks like if you don't do any customizations, just for your point of reference. And then the last thing I'm going to show you for the email rules is how to set up a confirmation email for your submitter. So for this one, instead of putting in a designated email address, you're going to say we want the email to go to whatever value is in the email field. And you're going to say add. And then you have all of the same options that you had before. For this one, I customized my email header to say confirmation, your submission to, and then whatever your form name is. Has been received. For the from address, I tend to also go custom and put my team's email address in there. And then for the from name, I again will go custom and I'll say the online strategy team, or we sit within marketing creative services, so I'll say MCS online strategy, whatever the case might be. But I just indicate what our department is, like who our department is in that custom field. And then down here, you have a couple of options. Again, I always delete the results submission link, and I leave that submit date. I delete the username thing. You can leave it like this, like they can basically get the same version of what you got. You can actually take this out entirely, and you can put in a message. So you can say, thank you for completing our application form. Let's fix that terrible spelling of application. Your submission will be reviewed internally within 3 to 5 business days, after which a member of our team will contact you with next steps. And we can just say, dear, if I was trying to be dynamic here, I can pull in the token for whatever their first name is, but we're going to say, we're not going to say dear anything because we don't know what their name is. So we'll just have that message, and then we'll say, sincerely, MCS Online Strategy Team. And then we will save that email. So now we've got 3 email rules set up. The first one going to all of us as the form owners, one going to the online strategy inbox as a designated follow-up person, and then one going to the value of the email field so that there's a confirmation message going to whoever submits the form. So that's how you set up your email rules. Are there any questions on this before we move on? I lost my chat. There it is. You guys are pretty quiet today. All right, I'm going to go ahead then and move on to form settings. So form settings, this is where you'll go to set up your confirmation page. So what do users see on the web page after they click the submit button? By default, there's this big confirmation message WYSIWYG text editor. Do not use this. We do not recommend using this. When the user uses this, the next page that loads, well, let me qualify that. It looks a little bit better in the editorial theme, but in the classic theme, it's pretty bad. you lose the heading at the top of your site. So I'll open up my team's website because we're still in the old team. So upon confirmation, you lose all of this. You lose the hero banner, your local brand, you lose the navigation. All you see is a plain white screen that has whatever text you put into this box. The user doesn't even have a way to like organically get back to the web form page if they wanted to outside of hitting the back button. It's just a bad user experience. In the editorial theme, it's a little bit better because you don't really have those same elements at play as far as the local brand and hero. But what you get on, I'll go to the main site's homepage. What you get instead is you'll have this header space. I think you'll see the navigation, but then the margin, like the next thing you'll see is just the white area with whatever text you put in that text editor space again, but the margins of it are off because it's not styled to be within the standard page margins for that theme. So we do not recommend using this very misleading, gigantic confirmation message WYSIWYG text editor. Instead, what we recommend you do is create a standalone general content page. So I'm going to do that next. So I went to my workbench, create content, and I was holding down the command key when I hit general content, but you can also right click on it and say open in a new tab. And we're there now. So I'm going to title this confirmation. Your form submission has been received. And then go ahead and fill in your text on this page as necessary. You can let your users know. I'm just going to get some more lorem ipsum, but you can let your users know, what's going to happen next, basically. So I'm going to put my lorem ipsum in there using the paste from Word option. But you can have in here, next steps. Our team will review your submission within 3 to 5 business days, after which a member of our team will contact you with next steps. You can have, contact information in here. You can use this the way you would use any standard page to give them information on what they need to do. So you can have images on here, button links, like if you want to say, now that you've completed the form, here's what we recommend you do next. Go check out the program information. Go check out, this faculty member's bio. Whatever the case might be, you can put that information here on your confirmation page to encourage, a next action for your user. So then, now that I've got that set up, I'm going to go ahead and go all the way down. Your site placement is still required because this is a basic general content page. And then I'm not going to put it in the menu just because I don't need it to have breadcrumb navigation or be in the navigation in any capacity. But I'm going to publish that page. And then I'm going to grab the page link. I like to use relative links, and what that means is just the portion behind the slash after .gw.edu. But if you want to grab the whole link, you can do that as well. That's totally fine. It's not really the wrong way to do it. But then back on my form page, underneath the confirmation message WYSIWYG that we bypassed, there's redirection location. There's confirmation page, which is the default, and it's going to redirect them to whatever you put here. And then there's custom URL. I'm going to put in the page link to the page that I just created. And then the third option that we never recommend is no redirect, and you can see that it's just going to reload the current page, which is your form page. So we definitely don't recommend that, but that is an option should you so choose. So now that we've indicated what our confirmation message is and what page will load after they've successfully submitted to the form, you now have the option to put in some limitations on the form as far as how many times a user can fill it in and how many actual submissions will be allowed, as well as that status of the form that we talked about earlier. So you can say total submissions limit, unlimited is the default, or you can say limit it to a number here, ever. So for instance, for our in-person training sessions that we offer, obviously those rooms have a maximum capacity that's allowed, so we'll find out what that is. And then we'll put that number here and we'll say that's the total number of submissions that we will allow for this particular course registration. You also have the option of saying those limitations are going to be based on a time capacity instead. So whether it's that many options per hour, per day, or per week. Like if you're running a contest, for instance, maybe it's the first 10 people to register to fill out the form will be entered into a raffle. So here you can say only accept 10, submissions every day. The same principle works for the per user submission limit. So you can either say a user can fill in that form as many times as they want, or you can say limit a user to a number of submissions every hour, every day, or every week. And again, we use this for our course submissions. We'll typically say limit the user to one submission. What I've found here, though, is if you reuse a form, the system might remember that the person filled in the form before, so it doesn't let them do it again. So you just have to be careful when it comes to limiting a user from filling out the form again. And what it's looking at is IP addresses, which you can see down here. It's going to give you some information here on what it's on how it identifies. So it's identified by the user login if it's a logged in user, by their IP address or their cookie if anonymous. And then I think it also will look at things like the email field because that's something that's fairly standard. So again, just kind of keep that in mind. If you're going to reuse a form and have a limitation on the number of times a person can submit to it, you need to make sure that you've cleared out their results so that they can fill it in again. And then finally, you have the status of the form, whether the form fields are available or unavailable. So that's either they're open or they're closed. And then for submission access, this is saying who's allowed to actually fill in this form at a more global scale. So can anybody fill it in, or can only specific types of users fill it in? The defaults are anonymous users, which really is just anybody out on the internet, a non-logged in user to your website. And then authenticated user is if you, while you're logged into Drupal, if you're able to fill in that form if you would like. So obviously if you want to test if your form is working as an authenticated logged in user, you would need to be able to submit to your form. So then once you've got all of these set up, go ahead and click Save Configuration, and that's how you set up your confirmation message for your form. Are there any questions on this one? All right. Well, then finally, we're going to move to form validation. And again, I'm not going to go over all of these. I'll just kind of pick out a few of them, but I will share the recording from the previous session where I went into a little bit more detail on all of these. So what this basically allows you to do is to set up validation rules on a per form basis. So you can say that a person will get an error message based off of one of these validation rules. The one that I tend to use the most, and these are not alphabetical, which is a little annoying to me, so you'll have to scroll to find it. And you can see there are quite a few. I think there's close to 2 dozen, if not more, validation rules that you can have here. But I tend to use this one here, ends with. And what this allows you to do is say, what does a submission, the value in a form field, have to end with in order for the submission to be accepted. And I like to use this one for email addresses. And sometimes I'll use it for websites. It depends. So for these sessions, these training sessions that we host, we like to make sure, obviously, that only GW community members are signing up for these. So what I like to do is I call this GW email validation. And I apply it to my email field. And I say that it has to end with @gw.edu. And then I just say add rule. And so what that's going to do is if somebody fills in that field and they put gmail.com or yahoo.com or whatever else .com, but anything besides @gw.edu, it's not going to accept that email address when they try to submit the form. So that's a validation that I like to use. And then another one that I like to use, there's two that I use them in the same way. One being starts with, and it's basically the opposite of what we just did. So you can basically say here, what does their the value of their form field submission, like what does it have to start with in order for the form to successfully submit. I teach a course on the GW Blogs platform, and there's a standard format for what those website links look like. So when I teach that course and I ask users, do you have a GW Blogs website? If yes, please let me know what that link is. And then I say here that it has to start with http blogs.gwu.edu. And then obviously I would apply that to the applicable form field on that particular form. I don't have that here. I'm just going to say additional comments, which is terrible, but I'm going to do that. Oh, and I'll also say GW Blogs link validation. And then I'll say add rule. And then that rule is there as well. Now there actually is a rule for valid URL. I'll use this one if I just want to know what the person's website is in general. And what this one is looking for is HTTP or HTTPS in the beginning. And then I believe at the end it's looking for a valid .com, .ew, .co, whatever their particular ICANN ending is for their website. But it's looking to validate those two things. The first one at the front being the HTTPS, and then at the end, if it's a dot whatever, and if it's missing that, it will not accept the submission to the form until a proper valid URL is in that form field. But you can see there are a lot of options here that you can use: minimum words, maximum words, character length, numeric values, all sorts of things. So if you have a form where you really kind of need to get into some nitty-gritty validations, like you can't really do anything with the information unless it's properly put in there in a specific format, definitely come here, take a look at the validation rules, see if one of them might work for you. In addition to telling you what the validation rule does, it will also tell you which field that particular validation rule supports. So not every single one, every rule works for every form field. It just kind of depends on what you need it to do. But like for instance, you can say there's a minimum number of selections required, and you can see that's only supported like on the select options form field. So you can say for checkboxes, for instance, at a minimum they have to select 2 out of maybe 5 checkbox options. So that's something that you can do. But that's just a quick rundown of what your validations do. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to complete this form, and a couple of things are going to happen. You all are going to get emails. I'm going to get an email. The online strategy inbox is going to get an email, and then we're going to be able to go ahead and take a look at the results tab. So put in my name, an email address. I'm not going to upload a file. I'm going to just pick a few options here just for fun. And then just to show you this in action, I'm going, because we put that rule on it, I'm just going to put an improperly formatted option there. But remember, I put that validation rule that said it had to start with blogs.gw.edu. Well, particularly with http://blogs.gw.edu. I'm actually just going to delete that value because we don't need it. And I'm going to say submit. So here's my custom confirmation page that I made before. Confirmation your form submission has been received. You all should have just received an email with the information that I submitted. There's also going to be one to the online strategy inbox, so I'm going to pull that up. It looks like it hasn't come through yet. If one of you does receive it, feel free to let me know. It could just take a moment for that to process. But you can see, because I've got this custom confirmation page, I also have my headers there, my navigation is there. Like I'm seeing what I expect to see on this form page, and I think I might have just gotten the email. I'm going to check over here again. Okay, here it is. So here's the default email that comes through if you don't change anything in the template for like what comes through. You get the submitted date, the submitted by user, because I was a logged in user. It's got my net ID there for my GW Drupal account, and then submitted values are, and then all of those values are just listed here. So not super user-friendly. Here's that link I was telling you about that you see. If I click on this right now, I think, yeah, it'll open in this browser tab so you can see, because this account, this team email inbox is not a Drupal user on that website, this is the error message that I received, and which anybody would receive if that link was left on the email template. So that's why I always recommend deleting it, because it's just not user friendly. People don't really understand what it means, and then it just kind of triggers some unnecessary stress. And if you yourself are thinking, I don't know what that means either, you then might reach out to us, and it just kind of can be a small snowball, not an avalanche because it's not a big deal, but just unnecessary stress. So I definitely recommend deleting it off of the email template. Now, you all should have also received an email letting you know that I submitted that field. I'm going to open up my email account, and my brain, for whatever reason, is blanking on what the email account link is. So I think on ours, I put a little bit of customization in there. So I actually have two emails here. The first one here is the confirmation and then I put form name in brackets, but hopefully you guys will put a real value in there saying that it has been received. So this is the confirmation that I, as the form submitter, received. Thank you for completing our application form. Your submission will be reviewed internally within 3 to 5 business days, after which a member of our team will contact you with next steps. So that's a pretty nice confirmation message to receive. The one beneath that, this is what I get as a form admin, where we customized it just a little bit. We didn't go through the steps to kind of pretty this section up, so it just dumped everything in there, but this is still usable information for me as a designated person who needs to follow up. I can see the name of the person, their email address, if any documents have been uploaded, and then what options were selected on some of the other fields. Now, for the upload documents, we no longer allow that information to be submitted via email. The reason being, sorry, I don't mean to keep going back and forth. I'm losing my browser tab. I've got too many open. The reason why we no longer allow the documents to be submitted via email is because it's a security risk. We were actually contacted by the security team in IT, letting us know that it was a security risk. It was sending off all sorts of flags on their end. So we worked with them to figure out what we needed to do, and what it came down to is just having it, when that submission goes through, letting you know that there's a document there, but you do have to log in to the backend of your GW Drupal website to actually access that document, to actually manually download it. So this is another one of those things where you need to decide if the person who's the designated follow-up or follow-upper needs to have access to those documents, but they're not a Drupal user in the backend of your site. That's going to be a step that somebody who is a Drupal user will have to take. They're going to have to log in, get that document, and provide it to that person. So keep that in mind if you're requiring that document to be uploaded and that your designated person within your office is not a Drupal user. That's something that you're going to have to work out internally, a workflow to get them that information. Any questions on what we've gone over so far? Okay, great. Well, then the last thing we're going to take a look at is this Results tab here. So when you click on your Results tab, there are a few things that you will see. And am I in the right form? Oh, no, this is the demo form. See, I have too many windows open. Where's my web form? Here we go, Webform 101 page. All right, so the last thing we're going to take a look at now is the Results tab. And when you click on this, you'll see that there are a handful of buttons here, and that first one is just Submissions. This information isn't really all that helpful. You're basically seeing like the system information for the submission, so the submission ID number, when it was submitted, if there's a user ID associated with it because this person is a Drupal user, IP address, and then you have operations here for view, edit, and delete. You might just click on view here, but what I actually found more helpful, I'm going to skip over analysis and I'm going to go to table. This is where it actually shows you the information that the person put in, and if there were more submissions, I would see all of that information in a table here. So if Jill had filled in the form, I would see her submission immediately behind mine, and then if any of you had filled it in as well, I would see all of your submissions here in table format. So I can see what everybody, I can see how many people have submitted to it. Up here it would show the number of submissions. Obviously, I'm the only one who's completed this form, so it says showing all results. But otherwise, it would say, 14 results showing 1 through whatever of however many results there are. I think on the first page, by default, it will show up to 20 results, and then you'll have the option to either go to the next page, or there will be a link that says View All, so you can see all of your results in one go. The analysis box, or the analysis button, I don't tend to use this one. Some of you might find this helpful, so I'll just go ahead and explain what it does. But basically, it will show you each individual question, and then it will show you calculations for how many people filled it out and what your averages are. So you can see here if it was left blank or not, if there was a value entered or not, and then it will give you an average based off of how many people left it blank versus how many people filled it out. So some people might find that helpful. I don't particularly find that helpful, so I don't usually use that. By and large, I tend to just go to this table view so I can see everybody's information all at once, like their actual values they submitted. And then the download one is the final one. So this is where you can go to export the results out of the backend of your GW Drupal website. You can have delimited text, so that's the .txt file, or a Microsoft Excel document, and this is going to actually be a .csv. It's not going to be a .xl or XLS file. It's going to be a .csv. From there, you can just click download, and it's going to give you everything, but something that I tend to do is go to the included export components, because this is where I can say what information I actually want in the export. And the reason why I do that is that in that first tab where we saw like the IP address and some of those things that really are not helpful to us, that's going to get included in that export as well. So by going to included export components, I can customize what's actually going to be in that exported document so that it's not quite so messy. And that is usually submission information. I uncheck this parent checkbox, which will uncheck all of the things that it covers here, leaving everything else. The one that I tend to recheck is just time, because that will be the one where it says the date that the person submitted the form to. So I do like to see, Dova submitted this form on April 19th, for instance. So I do tend to go at least, I uncheck this master one for submission information, but then I go back in and I check the box for time. And then I'll go ahead and I'll leave everything else, and I'll click download. I have options for where I want to download that to. I will go ahead and leave that set to these. Actually, I'm going to put it in my downloads folder. I think it'll be easier to find. It's going to look at the page title and make that the title of the page. And actually, I was wrong. This is an XLS document. I thought it was a CSV. But you can customize that if you want to, obviously. But I'm going to go ahead and just click Save. I'm not going to make any changes to it. One other thing I'll show you before I actually open up the document, though, is you do have the option for download range options. So if this is a form where you've been taking a lot of submissions in over time and you don't want to keep downloading submissions that you already have, you can say only download the submissions since the last time you downloaded, or only download from the latest submissions based off of the submission ID number. That's actually down here. So all submissions starting from ID, whatever the case might be, to this ending ID here. This one, I'm sorry, is only the latest, maybe 5 submissions, if you just want the last 5 submissions that somebody downloaded. So you don't have to download the document in wholesale. You can customize the fields that you want, and you can also customize the range of the information that you actually take in. I'm going to go ahead and open this up so you guys can see what you get. I think it's not really going to be surprising for anybody. And let me make sure I'm sharing this. So share content, share. So I always get this alert message. I think it's just, my system settings as far as the Mac version that I'm running, the Microsoft Office version that I'm running, and all of that. But this is basically what you see. So I'll get my Webform Page title in there, the whatever submission details I did allow, which I said was the time field, which you can see here is just that date. And then I get all of my values in there. So it's a pretty usable document. You can obviously clean it up in whatever way you need to clean it up, but it's a good starting point for processing the information that you have. from people who have uploaded to your form. So that is, oh, actually, one last thing, this clear button. I mentioned earlier if you're going to limit the number of times a person can submit to the form, I sometimes will reuse forms, like registration forms for a class that we teach repeatedly. When, let's say I taught this class last month and now this is a new fresh session for this month, I go to this clear button and I clear out the results for the previous month's class. You can see here it gives you a warning saying this action cannot be undone, and that is the truth. If you click this button and then like 30 seconds later you're like, oh crap, no, I need to get this one thing, unfortunately it is gone. We can't get it back. So don't hit this button if you're not sure that you actually don't need any more of that information. So yeah, that actually is everything that I have for you guys today. Do you have any questions for me? We do still have a few minutes. You guys are so quiet. Feel free to take yourself off mute if that's your preferred way of asking your question. Again, you can also put it into the chat window. But if not, I will go ahead and let you go. Thank you again for joining me today. Once the link is available for the recording, I will take a look at the video, make sure that it's a usable video, and then I'll make sure to share that with you guys afterwards, as well as the link to, oh, is there a question?
Just wanted to say thank you, and I've worked with forms before, but I just wanted to see if there were any new tips on, especially with the semester in Washington stuff. And I thought the security notes and the encryption stuff was helpful, but yeah, they did have some questions. I think I had figured it out a couple weeks ago where they wanted to go back, and after the email had come through with the links, some point later, nobody knew where that email went, and they wanted to figure out how to download the files again. But we figured it out. But yeah, they definitely have to have the full access to log in, which is part of the issue. And so yeah, that was a bit of a challenge, but it is a little hidden how to figure out how to find the files again. I mean, you have to know where to look, but so, yeah, it was a little tricky.
Yeah, I didn't put a file on mine, but those are typically under the individual submission. So you can see here under submission results, that number for my submission ID is a link, and this is where you would go to actually get that file.
And they had a lot. They had a lot of data and a lot of old data on that stuff too. So they were, it was like 600 submissions in there. So it was like, But I mean, we were able to look at it chronologically and download the stuff. But then if you look at the download file, that doesn't have the links. You have to go back into Drupal and actually. So the download file versus what's actually in there is not, you don't get the full files. So that's just sort of a note of something that we struggled with. So I guess other than the encrypting of that field when you're saying it was encrypted for upload, which I don't know, I guess we need to go back and check to make sure that that's correctly done, or is that something that got done on the IT side when they were worried about uploading?
For the that's done on that's in the code, so it's automatically going to encrypt that information. I think it'll just, I haven't seen it in a while, but I think it just says something along the lines of this field is not submitted, via email, please log in, something like that. Like there's supposed to be some help text there, which I hope is clear.
Okay, you mentioned it on the on like the GWID field or something like that, which is not applicable in this case, but where you had to actually click the encryption box.
For those, that's one where you have to manually encrypt it based off of whatever information that you're taking in. That's one where you would have to use your best judgment of, this isn't the kind of information that should be submitted over email, so I'm going to encrypt this field. And GWIDs is one where we've been told the field should be encrypted. So.
Okay, but the files themselves, when there's Word docs or PDFs or whatever, they should be automatically encrypted on the upload, and then it's just links in the emails, and then they have to log in to download. Okay, but there shouldn't be any other security concerns we need to be worried about there, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No, thank you.
You're welcome. And there's just two of you left on the phone, so unfortunately the rest of them aren't going to know this, but we are in the process of wrapping up testing on the upgraded module for web forms, and it's bringing some new features, so keep an eye out. We'll send you guys an email when that happens. It's bringing some things that people have been asking for a long time, so we're excited about that. And yeah, we anticipate that happening sometime in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. So again, I will send these resources to you guys hopefully in the next couple of days. And if you have any questions, feel free to take advantage of my team's office hours. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you for joining me.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, ladies.